In Wichita, Kansas, 1989, 20-year-old Krista Martin is out drinking with friends at a bar.
She just liked to go out and hang out and be with her friends. You know, she was 20 years old, she was young and starting to experience life.
After heading home, her night of fun is about to become a tragic end.
An individual known to Krista Martin went over to check on her.
He arrived, found the door was unlocked. He went inside the residence and he found Krista lying on the couch and she was deceased.
The autopsy indicated a sexual assault that had taken place and there had been some sort of blunt force that caused her death.
This shocking rape and murder sparks a hunt for a ruthless killer. Investigators get to work.
Detectives would come there, they would survey the scene, document what they were seeing, as well as having crime scene investigators arrive to actually process and look for evidence. They would have been looking for fingerprints, any type of trace evidence that they could find.
Despite the extensive efforts of Wichita police, over time, the case runs cold.
It was bad enough for the people who knew and loved her that she died, but I think that loss was compounded by the fact that over the last better part of 30 years, her case went unsolved.
When all other avenues of investigation have been exhausted, cold case detectives turn to groundbreaking forensic technology.
This case might be solvable using genealogical DNA.
It's an absolutely incredible tool that we have.
Suspect was never known to us, was never on our radar.
Nobody ever expected this person to be the guy that would be accused of a brutal rape and murder of Krista.
Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. Wichita, Sedgwick County, Kansas, 1989. The largest city in Kansas, known as a center for entrepreneurship and home to the iconic McConnell Air Force Base.
Sedgwick County is down the south central part of Kansas. Wichita is the biggest city in Sedgwick County. Aircraft has been for a long time our primary business since the 40s and 50s in this community. So it's very much a blue-collar community with folks who worked in these companies for a long time over the last several generations.
I think of it as a small town that's trying to be a big city. We've got about 500,000 people in our metro area. We have a downtown that's trying to revitalize itself, that's trying to become a thriving metropolis, if you will. We do pull a lot of people from the outer areas into Wichita.
It's a good place to raise a family, good cost of living, that sort of thing. So these are things that draw people to Wichita.
Back in 1989, Wichita was so much smaller. It was not as sprawled out as it is now. We definitely did have some issues, and just like any city does when it comes to crime and such.
In Wichita, 20-year-old Krista Martin calls an apartment on South Osage Street her home. She has an active social life, often seen at nearby bars, living life to the fullest.
She was 1 year older than me. Krista was a very shy, quiet person until you got to know her, and then her real personality came out. It was her and I, we hung out as much as we could, especially during the summers. Krista and I were the two tomboys of the family. Her and I were peas in a pod. We just had so much fun together.
But her partying lifestyle is a concern for Krista's father, who decides to pay her a visit.
Her father had been over to her apartment September 30th, and there was an argument about her lifestyle. She liked the bar lifestyle. She was a people person. She wasn't afraid to have a conversation with people. I believe that she may have been a little naive to what could happen to her, just allowing, people she just met come into her life. And I know some of her friends warned her about being like that she could potentially, get harmed if she continued allowing, strangers into her house. I don't think her father really agreed with the way she was living, and there was mentioning that Krista's father was going to help her move out of that apartment because she was having a hard time paying for rent.
She was working at a place called Kansas Blueprint in town where, it was a place that had been around for years, and she had worked there for a period of time but had been laid off. She didn't have a new job from what I understood. She had a recent DUI arrest, that caught up with her that she had to deal with, but she just liked to go out and hang out and be with her friends. She was 20 years old. She was young. She was just experiencing and starting to experience life when this tragedy struck her.
A friend of 20-year-old Krista Martin makes a visit to her home after a night out.
Dispatch received a call about 1 in the morning on October 2nd, 1989, from a friend of our victim. He had gone to the residence just to check on her, basically. The residence was a converted family residence, two-story family residence was converted into 3 apartments back in 1989.
He arrived, found the door was unlocked. He went inside the residence and he found Krista lying on the couch. And she was deceased.
He exited the apartment and then went to a nearby store to call 911. Detectives on duty at the time responded to the scene.
Brass would have shown up, so we're talking a captain, a lieutenant, somebody like that, who would have set up the crime scene, secured the scene.
They noted that there was no forced entry on the residence. The door was open. The windows were intact.
I got there approximately an hour later. I was called from home. I reported into our station, then drove immediately to the crime scene. Parked out in the street, walked inside, pushed me straight into the living room, and I observed a white female lying on the couch.
What stood out to me, first of all, the positioning of her body, the fact that she was in a state of undress, and the fact that it appeared that the fatal attack, the blow that had killed her, had taken place in a time before she'd had a chance to collect herself, cover herself, etc. Having handled, sadly, many sexual homicides over the course of my career, it looked like she was either struck preceding or simultaneous to the sexual attack, or maybe at the conclusion of the sexual attack. But the point is, she was unable to retreat, cover herself, seek help, anything like that. She died where the attack took place, is what it looked like to me.
They didn't really see a big sign of a struggle except for in the immediate area near the couch. At that location, they found a plate was overturned. There was a steak knife on the ground, and it appeared that she had been maybe interrupted from eating a meal of some sort.
There was a tampon on the other side of the couch where she was lying that appeared to have been used. It was just discarded there. Not a typical place that you'd find a tampon, and so that was taken. Obviously, her clothing was collected to be processed. The sleeping bag was collected as well.
Eventually, after the scene had been documented, Krista's body was taken in for an autopsy. And during that, a doctor was examining her. But while that was going on, law enforcement was present. A sexual assault kit was taken. And at that point, they're looking for signs of semen, seminal fluids, things like that. They were also documenting the various types of injuries on her. There were notated striations on what would be her left side of her neck. And they actually took the steak knife from the scene to the autopsy and had a comparison done. And they determined that that steak knife was likely the item that had made the striations on her neck. The doctors were able to, do their more thorough, intrusive examination where they determined that she died of blunt force trauma to the head.
I don't believe we ever found anything that would resemble a weapon that could have caused that bruising. The coroner thought maybe a hard strike with a fist could have done it, but I don't believe we ever did find anything that was considered a weapon that would have caused that type of damage to cause her death.
Even today, we don't know what it was. We just know there was some object that impacted the side of her head in such a strong manner that it caused her brain to shake, go against the other side of her head, but no actual item was ever found.
Once Krista Martin is formally identified, police are tasked with notifying her loved ones of her brutal end.
The family we contacted would have been Krista's parents. And she only being 20 years old, as a parent, that's got to be the toughest thing in the world for anybody can do. And I know it's extremely hard for them.
I was a sophomore in college, and I had just gotten back to my dorm room, and I got told by my RA that I needed to call my grandma Martin's house. And they asked if somebody was ill in the family, and I said, well, my grandmother has been. And so I called, and my cousin answered the phone, and I asked, what's going on? Is it Grandma? And he goes, no, it's Krista. And I go, what about her? And he goes, she's dead. And I blacked out and fainted and passed out on the floor. I remember going up to the casket and having a panic attack. Like I said, her and I were peas in a pod, and she was more like a sister to me than a cousin. Anytime I'm in town, I drive down Kellogg Street and I pass Osage. I always say hi to her because I still feel her spirit when I drive by there. It changed my entire life. I could not digest it at all. I didn't want to live. I wanted to be with her. And so I quit going to school. I changed the way I did things. I just didn't want to be around. I a couple times tried to wreck my car just to end it all. Just to be with her. Because I just didn't know how I was going to do it without her.
Wichita police immediately begin searching for a suspect. But will they be able to find this sadistic killer who so cruelly ended Krista's life? In the early hours of October the 2nd, 1989, the body of 20-year-old Krista Martin is discovered by her friend in her apartment on South Osage Street, Wichita, Kansas. The young woman had returned home from a night out with friends and appears to have been beaten to death. Investigators are called to the scene and begin trying to piece together the final hours of Krista's life.
I always felt like it was someone that she was at least aware of, an acquaintance or a friend, something to that effect. Due to the fact that there was no force on the door was kind of beat up, but there was no fresh breakage to suggest someone broke in. Learned early on that she was somewhat of a night owl, and so her being up that time of day or at night, whatever, was not unusual for her. She could have had a friend come over.
One thing we do know about Krista is she was very trusting of people. She was often known to get rides home from various bars or other locations she was at, and she would allow strangers to come not only to her house, but inside the house as well.
When the suspect made advances, Krista fought him off. She did not want to have anything to do with what he had on his mind. And when Krista fought back, that's when the attacker hurt her. As far as defensive wounds, like in her hands, any other part of her body, not that I recall, I don't believe so. You can fight somebody off and not get any wounds, but just the fact that she was on the couch and the attacker was on top of her, it would be difficult to fend off your attacker in that position. A sexual assault occurred, and during the assault, Krista fought back. The attacker overpowered her and killed her, and the fact that she was covered suggests that maybe it's unintentional. Of course, it doesn't make any difference, but well, he just had remorse by covering up the body, because when you see that at a crime scene there, someone's there and they're still there after the incident, and they cover the body, then that just tells you they either knew her or that there's some remorse, something to that effect.
As a rule of thumb, we're going to want to eliminate as a suspect, want to eliminate anybody who's close to her. Family members, obviously love interests. The sad truth is, roughly 80% of women who die a violent death, it's at the hands of someone they were in a relationship with. Assaults, stranger deaths are actually fairly rare. And so if I'm the lieutenant on scene that night, I'm going to want to know the whereabouts of her last boyfriend. I want to talk to her parents. I want to know who she associated with. I'm going to start small before I work my way out.
Detectives thoroughly search Krista's home, looking for any evidence that could point them to a suspect.
In those days, fingerprints would have been cutting-edge technology. And so the scene would have been dusted for prints, and lifts from those fingerprints would have been taken. A fingerprint, though, can tell you that someone was present. It does not tell you when someone was present, and so it would not have been dispositive. We would have still needed more information. DNA is something that is utilized often in law enforcement investigations with a single source contributor, so we're talking about one person who left semen, blood, saliva at or near a crime scene. The ability for law enforcement then to go find a suspect and match them to that individual DNA through DNA analysis has been very advantageous for law enforcement. Helps us eliminate suspects, helps us identify defendants, and obviously it's been a major tool in the criminal justice system for the last 30 years or so. But in those days, it was just serology, and so they would have collected any samples. They would have at least known to do that, which has been very advantageous in solving old cases, because old rape kits, old blood, semen, or saliva that was collected at scenes was maintained in property and evidence sections in law enforcement agencies around the country.
During Krista's autopsy, a rape kit is used, which provides investigators with a biological sample of the killer. Wichita detectives re-interview Krista's friend who found her the night of her murder.
The person that comes over there and finds her, you know, is obviously going to be a person of interest that we're going to talk to immediately. And they did that with that gentleman. I mean, they brought him up for an interview immediately. His whereabouts, what he was doing, why he came over there, you know, how he knew Krista, his relationship with Krista. Those things obviously were asked and answered, and he was a suspect, obviously, but through the course of the investigation, he was ruled out.
He was never considered to be under arrest. We just want to get a story and to find out what his relationship with the victim was and what he did and why he was there that particular night and that type of stuff.
Everything that he told the detectives about where he was or who he had been with had checked out pretty quickly. Within a day or so, you know, those answers were corroborated and backed up with the interviews they had done after the fact.
Now that Krista's friend is ruled out as a suspect, detectives move on to canvassing the local area.
Detectives would start combing the neighborhood in a canvas, knocking on doors, asking for information about what someone might have seen at the house, or getting other background information as to what normally occurs at Krista's residence.
When you have a major incident in a neighborhood, in a downtown area, or wherever it may be, boots in the ground, knocking on people's doors, going door to door to door, searching areas, searching streets, searching residences, I mean, all of that is a tried and true method, which is why we still use it today.
Have we had any reports of peeping Toms? Have we had any reports of sexual assault, break-ins, suspicious characters, anything like that? This is even in an era before we had registered sex offenders, so there was no registry in 1989 to at least compare to, say, how many sex offenders live in her neighborhood. That was not available to law enforcement at that time. So it would have been very, I think by today's standards, very old school investigative work.
They mainly worked on finding a timeline for Krista's last activities, knowing when she returned to the house, what she was doing that day. They were able to backtrack people that she'd been in contact with in the previous 48 hours. And really, you know, at the time, there's not the surveillance video that we have now on today's cases. So they basically had to find this information out just from talking to people and doing interviews.
She's found on October 2nd, early in the morning, which is a Monday. Her family last saw her on the 1st of October. She had gone over to her mom's house to pick something up on the east side of Wichita. Her dad saw her that morning. He thought he was going to help her move out of the apartment because she was trying to find a new place because she wasn't getting along there any longer. You know, so she had been seen, you know, within 24 hours or so of being found. I know that she had been seen at the gas station over there at Maple and Seneca. The clerk had been interviewed and said that they had seen her somewhere between, I think, 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock that afternoon, where she had come into the store to buy the steak and the potatoes and the corn and the things that she had eaten as one of her last things that she had eaten. They tracked down multiple people that were friends and acquaintances of Krista. People that she would have hung out with at this club or that club, you know, people that they knew she had gotten into a fight with prior to the murder happening. They had talked to a female that she had gotten into a fight with that was dating or married to another man. Those two people were thought to be suspects potentially. So they focused a lot of their time and attention on those two individuals and tracking down their movements and getting their interviews done and just corroborating their stories.
Our best tool was our DNA matches. So everybody we talked with, all the people, the acquaintances, the friends, agreed and submitted DNA to be tested against DNA profile from the crime scene. And the fingerprints, yes, we definitely look at that, but there was very little help. There was no other forensics, such as hairs, of course, no ballistics, nothing like that. But DNA was our best weapon back in 1989 to try to solve this crime. We actually enlisted the FBI in this particular case.
Between 1990 and 1992, Wichita police sent the DNA samples to the FBI for testing, in the hope that they could match it to a suspect. But unfortunately, this yielded no result.
I always hoped that this case would be solved. We did so many profiles and eliminated so many people. At one point, I thought, well, maybe this is a stranger or someone we're just not aware of.
Through all of the interviews they did, they looked at different people, they looked at different suspects, but everybody kept getting ruled out.
When a case is not solved within a few weeks, there's an element of it that's cold, meaning you're going to have to go out and find evidence to breathe new life into it. So I would say certainly within that first year, the failure to identify or inability to identify a viable suspect rendered the case, by any definition, cold at that point.
The case of Krista's death goes cold for many years, but Wichita police keep the investigation going as best they can.
When a case goes cold, people have the perception that it gets shelved. This particular case, it was not shelved. We do what we can for the first few months, and the personnel are scaled off, and I myself will pick up other cases, but it always stays with me because we continue to interview people, we continue to get the DNA samples, we continue to send samples to the FBI lab in Quantico to make the comparison.
The hunt for Krista Martin's killer may have gone cold, but revolutionary forensic technology is on the horizon. Could it provide the break on the case Wichita police have been waiting for? In 1989, 20-year-old Krista Martin returned home from a bar in the early hours of October the 2nd, when an unknown assailant bludgeoned her to death in her apartment in Wichita, Kansas. Investigators worked tirelessly to identify the killer in the years following, even collaborating with the FBI, but had no luck. Fast forward to 2009, Lieutenant Hennessy of Wichita Police briefs a new generation of detectives on the case.
In talking with him, I learned that the case was unsolved, and it just kind of piqued my interest, and I had some time that I was available to actually look at the case and look at the case file and see where we could go on it. There was a lot there. The original detectives had done a tremendous amount of work and knocking on doors and talking to people. They also got a lot of blood samples from individuals. And that's kind of where I started, because I saw that the sexual assault kit had been taken at the time of her death, and that there was semen present on that actual sample. However, in reviewing it, I saw that the case had not been submitted to CODIS, so I decided that probably the best option would be to try to get a profile identified and placed into the CODIS system. CODIS is basically a national DNA database. It has a couple different aspects of it. One would be unknown or unsolved crimes. For example, in this case, the profile of the unknown offender was put into CODIS, but it also then has the known standards of individuals who've been convicted of felony crimes, or even now just arrested for many different felony crimes. So basically this database was my hope of putting that profile of Krista's killer into the system, and that we would then have a name to go on and follow up. Our DNA analysts, they worked with the sample. They were able to generate a profile. They placed it into CODIS, and we received no hits. And honestly, that was pretty disappointing. And I was actually surprised, because I figured that someone who had done such a heinous and cruel crime to Krista had probably offended at another time. And so I thought either they would have been captured, or we might have another unsolved crime that they were involved in. But we received no hits at all.
The case runs cold once again for years, but in 2020, a glimmer of hope emerges in the form of a cutting-edge science that's solving hundreds of cold cases across the country.
We were speaking with the Wichita Police Department about a new investigative tool that we have at the FBI, known as investigative genetic genealogy. And kind of just discussing some of the cases they had that may be able to fit the criteria we have, where we can assist state and local law enforcement in utilizing that tool to help them in cases.
Genetic genealogy allows you to look at a DNA profile and understand a family tree for an individual that you're trying to identify. Folks who have taken a genealogy test can have uploaded their profile.
What we do once the profile comes to us is we separate those matches into groups. So what is a group? A group is an individual who matches the profile and shares matches with that profile. So once we have identified those groups, we work to identify the common ancestor among those matches.
And so forensic genetic genealogy allows you to start looking at all of these data points and all of these potential relatives for an individual that helps you build out a family tree and ultimately provides leads that could lead to the possible identity of a person.
In early 2020, I believe, Sergeant Jason Bartell, he was with the DV6 crimes unit. He was looking at cold case homicides that involved sexual assault, and he came across Krista Martin. He knew that in 2009, there was DNA submitted to CODIS with no hit, and he believed this was the perfect case to do genetic genealogy on.
Some of the things that are required: a violent crime, that the unknown DNA has already been submitted to CODIS and is searching in the CODIS system, and that they have DNA left over that we can utilize to then test. The Wichita Police Department had some DNA left over from the initial crime scene processing. And that DNA, Wichita Police Department sent to a private lab. They conducted an analysis of that DNA, which we then were able to get a copy of and submit to consumer genomic sites. And from that point, we can find potential matches, family matches to the unknown subject, and then begin building a family tree of that unknown subject to try to identify who he or she is.
September of 2020, roughly, is when I was given this case and introduced to this case. I was told, hey, there's this new thing called genetic genealogy where we can use, familial DNA to trace back an ancestor or trace back this DNA to certain ancestors and then build back down from there. I was fortunate to be paired up with some FBI agents that were pretty well versed in this technique, that had an idea of what they were doing and how to do this technique. And so I was put in touch with fantastic genealogists from the FBI that knew what they were doing and kind of brought me up to speed.
Krista Martin's niece reaches out to Wichita Police to support the investigation, which is once again underway.
I decided to reach out to the police because I had outlived her. I was 21 and she was 20 when she was murdered. That's just what kind of made me want to reach out to them.
Ember's been the driving force for justice for Krista. Ember has been the one that has poked and prodded and asked a lot of questions over the years. She kind of had this burning desire to get justice or answers for her aunt. And so I think that's what led her to kind of ask more questions of the investigators. We were working on this case in 2020, but I think she reached out in 2021 with more questions and asking for more information.
I met with detectives several times, and we collected names from some of her friends and went and got DNA samples from those people. All the ones that we collected were ruled out.
Her and I would communicate through email from time to time, and we would keep her up to date as much as we could. My fear was, I don't want to get you excited until we know something for sure. I don't want you to get excited just to be let back down again.
Despite this progress, investigators could not identify any matches.
Through the entire investigative process, Adam and Agent Davis, they went to numerous states, interviewing numerous people, taking voluntary DNA samples, uploading those samples just to see how close they are getting within this family tree. You think you're on the right track, and then your DNA confirmation comes back and you're way off. So I know there was a lot of that. There was a lot of ups and downs. So it's just a roller coaster of emotions when you're investigating these types of cold cases where you think you're just very close, but you're actually very far away.
I did bug Adam quite a bit because this case was very important to me and I was hoping to get answers. So anytime I ran into him, I would ask him for an update on the case. And he would tell me it's just everything was moving kind of slowly, but they were working, building family trees, and they would keep plugging along. After a year or two, I started thinking, man, I don't know if we're going to get it yet. But eventually, he told me that they were getting very close. And at that point, I started bugging him a little bit more because I was excited about the direction the case was going.
We were told that Othram was the go-to lab, that they were one of the labs that was premier in this field of genetic genealogy. We were told that they do fantastic work with limited amounts of DNA.
When an evidence item such as skeletal material or maybe a blood card or whatever the case may be is provided, we work to extract DNA. And we have a process known as a suitability analysis, and that allows us to look at the DNA that has been extracted and really understand the characteristics that will help to inform our downstream process. And that downstream process is the DNA profile development. Forensic grade genome sequencing is a set of processes in the lab that allow us to work on every imaginable type of DNA. Once forensic grade genome sequencing was completed to develop a DNA profile, that DNA profile was transferred to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team. The FBI's team did their work and their research to determine a name or a possible name for the individual.
And it was in April of 2023 when they reached out and said, hey, we've been doing some looking into this Hart family, and they're not really from Wichita, they're from Arkansas, but there is a guy that sticks out in our tree. His name is Paul Hart, and he lived in Wichita in 1989. I wish I remembered where I was or what I was doing, but when I heard that, I was like, this is our guy. Because what I have learned through genealogy is it's all about location, location, location. And when you find that person who is in the location at the time of your murder, that is who you need to look into. And so when I heard that Paul lived 6 houses around the corner from Krista at the time of her murder, I knew that we were onto something. We needed to explore this option for sure. It was the break that we had been looking for.
34 years after the murder of 20-year-old Krista Martin, and detectives have identified a strong suspect. Is this another dead end, or have they finally caught up with a ruthless killer? On October the 2nd, 1989, 20-year-old Krista Martin was discovered bludgeoned to death in her apartment in Wichita, Kansas. Tragically, the young woman had also been sexually assaulted. The Wichita Police Department worked the case for decades with the assistance of the FBI, but could not identify her killer. Now, in 2023, a remarkable breakthrough has occurred using forensic investigative genetic genealogy. Investigators have created a family tree of the killer using his DNA left at the scene 34 years ago.
In this case, it was, many matches that we had and many trees that we built. You just kind of work your way through it until you slowly narrow it down to the subject. Eventually, we ruled out all the other potential subjects and identified Paul Hart as the subject. It was the spring of 2023.
When doing forensic genetic genealogy, a lead is developed, and there needs to be confirmation testing throughout the process to really hone in on the person, the identity of the individual. So in this particular case, investigators were able to collect samples from relatives of Paul Hart to help to confirm his identity as the person responsible for Krista's murder.
Now that Paul Hart is identified as the killer, investigators set out to locate him. However, a devastating revelation is around the corner.
Paul's name had come up as one that would fit potentially. And while we were doing the background of it, that's when Detective Vandermolen notified me that he died in a car accident in 1999.
When I found out the identified suspect in this case actually died some years ago, it kind of made my heart sunk, I want to know why, how they knew each other, how they met, and why you have to do this. And, those are burning questions most anybody would have, especially for the family. But it was unfortunate. He got away with something, but he met his demise a little too early. The suspect was never known to us, was never on our radar, which kind of explains, why we couldn't find Krista's killer among her circle of acquaintances.
June 13th, 2023, we get the go-ahead to go to Arkansas to meet with the Hart family to try to track down anybody that's still alive that would know who Paul was. And so, as you can imagine, I'm getting ready to go and interview family members of a deceased individual about a homicide that happened in Wichita 30 years before, that they probably had no clue about. And so, for the entire trip down there, I'm trying to wrap my head around how can I break this news to this family, right? Because we've already got one distraught family in Wichita being Krista Martin's family, and now I'm getting ready to go break news to this other family who's getting ready to become completely blindsided by this information. His daughter agreed to meet with us, and when I laid everything out on the table for her, she explained her family history for us. She explained who her dad was, what her dad did. She was over the top cooperative. Paul's wife wasn't a part of the original interviews that we had done. She wasn't there with her daughter, and so I gave her my phone number. I said, hey, here's my number. I said, if you talk to your mom and you come up with any new information or anything that would be beneficial, shoot me a text or give me a call. And so we're still in Arkansas doing some more interviews, and my phone's blowing up, and it's Paul's daughter calling me and texting me saying, hey, I've talked to my mom, and it turns out my dad was a truck driver. He was working for this trucking company in Arkansas and ran away to Kansas with his boss's wife at the time. Paul's wife provided me with a couple postcards that Paul and this woman had sent it back to his family with an address here in Kansas that said that this is where they had settled down to. And I said, well, they ran to Kansas for what? She said this lady got a job working on a pig farm in Kansas. That's how they ended up in Kansas. And so what turns out to be a job that she takes here in Kansas leads them to Wichita. It was a confirmation that we were looking for, that we knew. It no longer was it just, speculation or a record on a computer that said he was here. It was real life proof that he was in Kansas and had some sort of tie to this state, which was the only tie out of all of the thousands of people that we had looked at. It was the only person that had a tie to Kansas in that time period. We had gotten a DNA swab from the daughter to put into a consumer genomics website. We got those results that showed that she was the daughter of our murder suspect. And so we went back in August of 2023 to this town in Arkansas to get a buccal swab from the daughter, from the mother, that we could then compare to do a paternity test in order to confirm that we have the correct person. And we're able to triangulate those results to show within 99% certainty that he is the father of this female.
We knew enough about the evolution of DNA back then to know that it's going to evolve, it's going to get better, but I had no idea it was going to get to the point where just about a microscopic piece of DNA can identify people just right off the bat. But I knew that sometime it would come in handy. Years later, it certainly paid off.
Once we found out that Paul Hart was our suspect, we notified Mark Bennett with the Sedgwick County District Attorney's Office, and we met with him, told him the facts of the case, and he concurred that if Mr. Hart was alive today, that he would accept murder charges and he would file murder charges against Mr. Hart.
There's no connection to the two of them that we could account for. It may have been a crime of opportunity. Perhaps he saw her outside, got her attention, maybe he followed her in. But when someone takes the time to sexually assault somebody and use a blunt instrument of some kind to end their life, there's an element of premeditation to that, certainly, and it certainly would have been something we could have alleged. We would have either charged it as a premeditated murder, or at the very least what we call a felony murder, which is a homicide, an intentional killing that takes place during the course of a sexual assault.
We met with our city law department just to let them know what we've learned during the investigation. We have identified a suspect. We've met with Mr. Bennett, and we're going to the public and announcing this. And we got the green light from our law department to proceed with that. And October 2nd of 2023, which is the anniversary, we announced that we had solved the cold case. We got a lot of praise on Facebook and on social media, just all the great work that we did to solve this case. But, this is not about the police department. This is about Krista Martin and just some really good investigators having the opportunity to investigate this case. And the recognition on this it's awesome, but this is about bringing closure and being that voice for Krista Martin.
A family not having answers for so long, at some point, if you feel confident in what happened and knowing what happened, then I think that can bring some sort of closure to a wound that has been present for 30 years.
I was in shock for a couple days after that, but yes, I do have closure from that. A lot of her friends were given closure and they were happy that it was over.
Mentally, it took a toll on me because, like I said, it changed how I perceive people. I'm always worried something's going to happen to somebody else in our family. I'm protective of everybody, and I just want to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again to anybody that I know.